Hey everybody.
Hey, buddy.
Alright, looks like we're coming through.
Nice, nice. Oh, sorry, this one's yours.
Is it?
There you go.
Oh yeah, so it is.
Took a little swig out of that. Sorry about that.
It's alright. Sure you don't have a heart attack?
No.
Okay, we are running. Oop, sorry. I think I forgot one little thing. Oh no, the owl's awake. Okay.
Nice, nice. Okay.
Okay, buddy. Well, we've had a really good stretch. We knocked out 3 in a row last week.
That's right.
And then this is our second in a row, and then tomorrow we'll take a break. And
That's right.
back at it on Monday. So thank you so much for doing all that. Really appreciate
Absolutely,
it.
man.
Helping this project come alive.
Yeah, man.
We're almost there.
We're over halfway through now.
Definitely. It's
Yeah.
easy sailing from here.
Exactly. All downhill.
So today I wanted to talk to you. Well, so
First,
today. Today is the 13th of February, 1:39 p.m. And today I wanted to talk to you about the UK.
Yeah.
I think one of the central points of this conversation will almost undoubtedly be Brexit.
Mm-hmm.
But I figured before we get into the fun stuff, we should, or the not fun stuff, depending on who you are. Shout out to my folks.
Yes.
To my family back home. I figured we should start with just sort of what experiences you've had with England. And,
Yeah.
and the UK.
Not too many. I've been there once when I was really, really young.
Oh yeah.
My dad and mom were teaching a course there in the summer.
Oh yeah.
A long, long time ago. And we stayed in Sussex, and then we took trips to just basically around that area to Brighton, I remember, and then also to London, of course.
Yeah.
But we were there for about a month. So
How old were you then?
I was 8 years old. I was really, really young.
No,
I
totally.
was 7 or 8, yeah.
8 years. 8 years old was the first age that I flew unaccompanied to England.
Wow.
Or was it 2 or was it back? I can't remember. But I do remember staying with my grandparents alone, which was a big treat.
Nice.
So, no, I've spent a little bit more
Yes.
time in England.
Yes.
I moved there when I was 2. I was there until I was 8. Those 6 years, Marby. Those 6 years are obviously not the clearest in my memory at this point.
Right.
But part of that is because I've spent a fair amount of time going back there.
Yeah, visiting your family and stuff like that.
Exactly. So a lot of the memories have been sort of overlaid. But that also means there's a fair amount of continuity there.
Mm-hmm.
And I bore a very clear English accent for many years.
Mm-hmm.
And then it sort of got replaced by an Americanized something. And at this point, my accent is a really weird mix of stuff. And well, certainly, I think when I'm in America, I speak more American. And
Totally.
in Canada, I speak more Canadian.
Yeah.
And when I'm in England, I speak more English.
That English accent comes roaring back when you're back there.
Pretty much, yeah.
That's good,
I mean,
man.
you land and people start to talk in a way that you used to talk, and and you just sort of start to shift into something a little more English.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, you have the heritage to back it up, so I guess it's okay.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So when I remember Mr. Blair's politics class being, we definitely touched on the EU and that sort of thing.
Yes.
What's the sort of start of you interacting with England as a more political concept?
It's probably at that same time. I didn't really know too much about England. And I think I sort of started following politics more seriously a little later on than you did. So in high school, I remember really kind of boring down and looking at, England as an institution, the EU as an institution. And the EU was really cool. Like, I like the idea a lot of the EU, even though there are tons of problems. But honestly, I didn't understand that it was so controversial in the UK. I thought like where the issues were on the fringes to the east, Eastern European countries and countries like Greece and countries that were, not these kind of bastions of colonial authority when you think about Europe,
Yeah, no, it's really crazy. I certainly wasn't aware of it at the time either, really. What do you... what do you remember, if anything, about the relationship between the UK and Canada?
I do remember it being very close in a lot of ways, and I do it was funny, my dad growing up, because he's American, he really didn't like a lot of the monarchy symbolism around Canada too much, but I remember I grew up with a family that were pretty staunch British royalists, and we would always play like toy British soldiers in the basement. It was very fascinating.
So flesh that out for me a little. Who's the family that's?
So yeah, this is my family. My family, Sean. He's a young guy. He's like basically I knew him since he was born. He's like a 3 years younger than me. Really nice guy. But he comes from a very military, British and then Canadian military tradition. Very much. A lot of his relatives are in the military. He's in the military. So that kind of idea of Canada as a British nation, or a British an offshoot of the British nation, was very much part of that culture growing up.
Fascinating, because I come down as you're blatantly aware. I think that, as most people know, very hard on the. On your father's anti-monarchy side.
Yeah.
I'm really against that sort of institution. But,
definitely.
But it's interesting to see this sort of dynamic play out even in your life.
Absolutely. It's fascinating, And I can't say for sure that they, maybe they aren't staunch British royalists in the way that they always support the monarchy, but it was just the institution of the British military, and therefore like the British monarchy was very much part of my time spent growing up with that guy, with him. It was very much in his household. Little toy British soldiers everywhere.
Yep. I know the type with a little like red uniforms.
Exactly. So
guns on their shoulders.
Really interesting, And our military as well is very much has very similar symbols around that, and very similar uniforms in a certain way, and we march around as well.
Sure, it's hard not to see echoes of the red jackets and Mounties, for example.
Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, that's just kind of was my exposure growing up to sort of British culture in a lot of ways.
Sure. What do you know now, sort of, about the history of the Great Island Nation, and now that you've done way more research and thought about colonialism?
Absolutely.
How far back do you sort of reach, and
for sure,
and how much do you feel like you can fill up to sort of the present day?
So, I kind of, from this history course that we're reading, and some of the, that we're taking together, and some of the stuff I've been reading on my own about Celtic history.
Yeah, totally.
Kind of the British Isles are where the Celtic people were able to retain their culture and not be assimilated by the Roman Empire. Obviously more complicated than that, but as this, a sort of summation
they only
of
got
the
half,
process. Exactly, they only got half. They had the wall there, Hadrian's Wall, and they were able to fend off the Brits. So that kind of identity, that kind of Celtic identity, really comes from the British Isles in particular. Then there's some gaps, for a lot of gaps for me, but I do kind of, especially with all the different kings and the wars, I do know about the Normans invading and the Saxons and the different kind of people. Yeah. Exactly, 1066 with William the Conqueror at the Battle of Hastings. I do kind of know that it's been a relatively small piece of land compared to where we live. That it has a ton of people dying throughout the millennia over who controls what.
Yeah.
And for me, it's so fascinating that, and Europe is really fascinating to me. Since I don't have as many roots in Europe as you do, or roots in the UK, is that there's so many kind of ethnic identities packed into such small areas. That you drive across England, for example, and it's smaller than Ontario. But the variation in the types of people and how people identify and all the different ways people speak, it's very different than if you drive from one part of Ontario to another part of Ontario.
From London to Markham.
Exactly.
No, totally. That's something that is still kind of remarkable. I think people will tell you that aspects of that are being lost. But I'm sure people were telling you that 400, 500 years ago. So,
exactly.
It's hard to get too crazy about it. I don't know that much about English history. I learned in the last couple of years. I learned a little bit more about the English Revolution,
right,
and the temporary overthrow of the monarchy. Yes, only to be replaced. No,
the Glorious Restoration. God damn it!
And in so many ways, English history is. It's sort of like Akkadian history. You're like memorizing kings lists.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing doesn't really appeal to me. And I find it bizarre that they managed to teach so many kids about this endless succession of inept and incapable rulers, with one or two good ones sprinkled in, and for some reason, a vast percentage of the people in the UK are still supporters of the monarchy. It's
right.
It's a real head scratcher for me. But I think at this point it's hard to escape where this conversation is starting to go, which is what's your idea of the relationship between the United Kingdom and as a Canadian, somebody a little less aware perhaps on the ground. What's your idea of the relationship between the United Kingdom and Europe, perhaps through the 20th century and then into nowish?
Absolutely. So, I kind of where I kind of learn more about or know a little bit more about British history, and one of the places that the gaps have filled in a little bit was through my dad and talking about World War II in particular. Totally. And World War I when I started studying World War I later on. So because that point, at the beginning of the 20th century, Britain's at a high point, in a lot of ways.
The last high point, yeah.
Yeah, the last high point, exactly, They've successfully won the Boer War, if I'm not mistaken. I think that was a victory for them. They've kind of, I was against Russia, Prussia.
There's things going on. These imperialist wars are... You have to actually know what you're talking about.
Exactly. And then, exactly. And I kind of know the bits and pieces of it, but not too much the general thrust. But, what I remember is really cool is England, the beginning of kind of World War I, when England kind of really has to sort of show up as a military power in the 20th century. The last time that the global European powers have fought a global war has been 100 years ago with the Battle of Waterloo and Napoleon, the rise of Napoleon. So war has changed a lot, and for me, kind of, what I see is sort of that's the twilight of the English Empire. World War I and in particular World War II.
Yeah, that really matches pretty closely to everything that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
And certainly my World War I history was very shoddy. But these great powers at a real zenith. At the start of the 20th century, in those early golden years. And then World War I strikes, and Britain's supposed to be the most powerful thing on the face of the earth.
Exactly.
And of course, in reality, they're all of their strength is spread so thin that these sort of concentrated and focused efforts from these different countries in different places end up sort of overwhelming all these different parts of the British alliance. And over... and obviously, economically, I know a bit more about the situation.
Right.
I know that World War I and World War II are the major calamities for capital.
Yes, absolutely.
And in England's case in particular, it's a calamity for capital held abroad. Because as a colonial nation, how you can see that in terms of wealth is based on how much of your money is just coming from stuff that you're holding abroad.
Right.
And that takes a huge hit. Shockingly enough,
right,
and then basically falls to a fraction of what it was, and two, based on we have very limited information about capital, but based on the information we have on capital, England at the height of its colonial empire
right.
gets the most money out of everywhere else than anywhere in history.
Right. Yeah.
So, which is part and parcel, you would think, of colonialism, but still kind of remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that sort of sets up this moment, and clearly one of the things that's most blatantly obvious, one of the reasons I wanted to start here, is that, in World War I and World War II, Europe is a totally divided place.
Yes, absolutely.
A huge amount of European politics is about, these different people and their abilities as men to bring countries together and to argue and to form coalitions and alliances and these incredibly complicated nets of control and this general sort of disdain for normal human beings you might have to deal with.
It's really fascinating. I remember reading some of the history, and apparently it's once again sort of the problem when you get something like a really complicated political system like Europe, and then a leader comes along like Bismarck, in the last century, and he's really good at running it from the German perspective. He sets up a well-oiled machine. This is how you do diplomacy. When he goes and his his successors, they can't run the machine properly, and things start to disintegrate. And that has always really struck me with, it really requires good, sustained leadership to keep something like European politics running properly and smoothly. And when that goes, shit goes down.
Yeah, it's not a good system unless it can survive having a bad leader. And now, that cues us perfectly into Brexit.
Yes.
So. The last little bit of preamble, I think, is just a moment of me ruminating on my own beliefs and understandings of how political systems work, of the differences between different democracies. Because one of the things that I feel like I've learned as I grew older that I didn't understand a fraction as well when I was younger and first interested in politics is that it's not just democracy good. Right. It's that how your democracy is set up and the ability for your democracy to change over time and to adapt to the real life circumstances changing in the world. These are the things, and still maintain these important aspects of its character, of its ability to protect the individual right to vote, of its ability to protect human rights. All of these things are what makes a democracy actually function properly. It's not just that people show up and vote at the polls every year for 2 or whatever number of years.
Right.
And that has been really reinforced by everything that's happened in Brexit.
Yeah.
That I think there's something really broken with the way the English political system works to an extent that is greater than what is broken with, say, the American political system. And I think that's definitely a controversial opinion.
Yeah.
But that really sets up a framework for what unfolds afterwards.
Yeah.
You know, the so much of the ideas about democracy. Like, what's democracy to you, buddy? Like, try and hit me with something nice and simple. And
absolutely. You know, I think when it boils down to it, it's citizens being able to participate in government. That takes various...
Perfectly done, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, that's kind of what it comes down to, you know? And it's not, as you said, it's not just voting, but how much you as a citizen can participate in the running of your country, you know? And I think that's that for me is a hallmark of democracy.
Right, so let's put something on top of that that's distinctly English. Class.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the collision between this idea that, you know, human beings in a democracy, they should be able to participate in their government, with the idea that different human beings across your country in smaller and smaller groups are more able than others.
Right.
You know, overlap those things for me.
Yeah. It seemed pretty mutually exclusive.
Yeah. They really do.
Yeah.
And that's to me the basis of the flaw in the in the British system, that they've created a democracy that's tried to resolve these two irreconcilable concepts. You know, that's why it's a constitutional democracy with a monarchy still intact.
Right.
Because you don't, like, the English system doesn't even really pretend to value people equally.
Right.
Except when they show up at a ballot box.
Right.
You know, like, it's just, there's plenty of things wrong with the American system. And there's certainly ways that you can stratify class in America.
Yeah, absolutely.
But so much of what I feel like can be and should be done in America often comes down to fixing the way wealth is distributed.
Yeah.
Honestly, I feel like you could fix the way wealth was distributed in the UK, and you still have huge socio-political problems.
What would some of those problems be? Like, just because I'm not as aware of them as you are.
So, the way class works, on sort of, to my understanding, and also backed up by what actually happened in the real world. Right. One of the most basic ways that class works is you as an individual are aware that you belong to a particular class. Right. This is reinforced by your interactions with other people. Yeah. This affects your chances in life. Right. But it most importantly affects the way that you perceive what you are capable of doing. Right. If you are born in a particular class, you see yourselves as having kinship with this class. Yeah. And most people in different classes don't really feel like, you know, this is a huge problem or anything. Right. They just see themselves as being within a shared group that ties them together. So that's sort of their shield against the things that are difficult in their lives. They're like, yeah, there's stuff that's hard in my life, but I've got all these buddies who are together. They're with me in this. You know, we work together. We're the British people. We keep fighting together. Right. And then there's the middle class above them who's like, yeah, you know, we there are things that aren't so great in our lives either, but we work together. We're the British people. You know, that sort of shared identity at each level is an incredibly important part of it. And it's only once you get up to the higher levels that the aspect of being better than everyone else just becomes blatantly apparent. Right. You know, you live in a country with lordships. Like there's a there's a chamber of government where people are assigned lords for life. Right. And then they get to sit there. These things are so crazy. Yeah, no, exactly. But if you grow up and that's a part of your British identity, and if you're in the lower classes, you're just aware that you're not going to be a lord. Right. But nobody ever promised you that you were going to be a lord. Right. You know, nothing, you don't feel like anything is being taken away. Right. Because nobody ever told you could have it. You could have that in the first place. And this is demonstrated in part by the way the system for governance and the system for education worked in the UK for years and years and years, which was funneling it through oh boy, this always gets difficult. What in England is called public schools, but what over here would be called private schools.
Okay.
And specifically, oh nuts, I've forgotten the other one, but Eton is one of the two major public schools in their meaning.
Private over here, public over there.
Private over here, public over there. And then there's another one that's super famous too that I should have on the top of my head. But so that's your high school education.
Okay.
Right? You go to one of these two schools, maybe three.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
Private education here.
Yeah.
Then you go to one of two universities, Oxford or Edinburgh. And that's it. If you're outside of that path, then you're not getting into the top spots, the top jobs.
That's fascinating. Even if you went to Cambridge, even if you went to...
Sorry, I lied about Edinburgh. I don't know why it came out Edinburgh. Cambridge is the...
Cambridge and Oxford.
Cambridge and Oxford.
Okay.
Yeah. My brain said Cambridge and my mouth said Edinburgh.
No, that's okay. I was just wondering.
I think my cousin Julian's at Edinburgh right now, so that's like it intercepted the neurons. Sorry. So that's
okay, man. But
and that started to shift a little bit. Right. That was the way it was.
Wow.
Cambridge or Oxford.
Wow. Wow. Because it's fascinating. I remember I am on like a talk about a shot in the dark, but I applied for Cambridge when I was at Avellard actually, which was really interesting, an interesting process, but very very different than applying to graduate schools here and graduate schools in America. I'll just say there was just the general sense that you know, I don't know, you had to prove your worth as a human being just a little bit more. Yeah. Not that you were just like academically smart or you know, a gifted student, but that there was a wall here and you had to prove that you were on a certain side of it.
Yeah, no, these for generations were the gatekeeping institutions of you know, access to power in the UK.
Right.
You know, I'm a letdown in the family. My mother went to Oxford. My mother's mother went to Oxford. I went to the University of Guelph.
Right. Yeah.
So
which is a good school.
But it's in Canada.
Yes.
And that's that in older generations would just mean that I just wouldn't have a shot at top spots in the UK. People wouldn't consider me. I could enter into the civil service. Right. I could try and work my way up. I would get to a certain point, and they would look at my resume and they just say, "I'm sorry, but you aren't from Oxford or." Now I just keep on wanting to say Edinburgh, but you aren't from Oxford or Cambridge. Right. And
wow, man.
It's crazy. Like I watched with my mom at one point. There's this 7-Up series. Have you heard of this?
Could you? Maybe, but I don't. So it rings a bell, but
there were a bunch of kids in the.
Oh yeah, you told me about this. Yeah. Yes, because you told me about it. Yes, but please, yeah.
Every 7 years they came back to them.
Right.
Now they're like 50 or something, or even older.
Right.
They've been doing it for many years now.
Right.
And it's interesting is it kind of tracks the changes in the UK throughout a long period now.
Right.
But there's one I remember very specifically, this very sort of gifted, capable student who ends up having sort of a sad and kind of depressing life. But he doesn't get into one of the top schools, and he gets about halfway through, and he's just like, what's the point? You know, this isn't going to get me a better job. Right. You know, there's no sort of end line for this anymore. Right. You know, I missed my shot. Right.
Wow.
And that in a way is, I know obviously if you come from a family where you're, like you were talking about evaluating you as a human being. Yeah. Like imagine you sat down on that interview with the guy from Cambridge, right? And he was like, you know, why should you go to Cambridge? And it's like, well, my dad went to Cambridge, and his dad went to Cambridge. Right. You know, I've been wanting to go to Cambridge since I was -3. Right. You know, like that. Like on a basic level, is pretty convincing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
My generations have passed this test before.
Right.
If you don't let me in, then you're letting my whole lineage down.
Right. Wow.
And things are changing there.
Right.
There are other good schools in the UK, as we know.
Right. Such as Edinburgh.
Such as Edinburgh.
Yes, University of Edinburgh is a great school.
Such as Imperial College London.
Mm-hmm.
There are other great schools there,
Yeah.
and the paths to power have become less strict.
Right.
But at the same time, we have some other things that we should probably bring into the conversation.
Yes.
Around this point.
Yes.
So let's flash all the way back to Mr. Blair's class. We've got a real good background now, I think, for where we're gonna hit this stuff. Half an hour and time to hit the meat of this topic.
Hit the meat. Yeah, exactly.
What do you remember him telling us about the EU at that point?
EU was at that point, like, it seemed like it was pretty stable aside from what was going on in Greece and perhaps Eastern Europe. But the consensus, at least I got, and was that things were working. Things were working, except for outlying countries that didn't seem to have a lot of power within the overall structure of EU.
I remember this and this little bit, and I think you might remember it too.
Yeah.
That he would say that he'd been teaching this unit for a couple of years now, and that it had been really boring up until this year.
Yeah.
When things had just started to get
interesting, exactly.
Because all the Greece stuff was starting to happen, and that was a great class in a way, because we were actively sort of engaged in responding to the world.
No, it was really cool. And as he said at the beginning of class, like, we're going to talk about things that haven't happened yet.
Yeah.
And that we did.
Yeah, we totally did.
Which was awesome.
So, what's the first time that you think you heard with or registered the idea of Brexit?
Oh man, this was back in, I think, 2015, 2016. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't following it that closely, but because I was at the final year of school there, so I was focusing a lot on school, and the U.S. election was in full force, so a lot of my attention was, or the lead up to the U.S. election was in full force, so a lot of my attention was that. But I heard these rumblings of, the UK might split from the EU. But for me at that time, they were just as similar to how preposterous it would be if Trump won at that time. It was similar in kind of people's understanding, at least around me, that the UK would actually vote to separate from the EU. It was similarly sort of unfathomable.
And I was slap in the middle of that. I didn't think either of those things were going to happen.
Yeah.
And over the years, that's really come back as sort of a moment of sort of political idealism just kind of dying away.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's one of the reasons we did this whole conversation about class is because I've been trying to think of the structures of democracy.
Right.
I've been trying to think and figure out for years now, why the British people acted the way they did.
Right.
Honestly, when Trump came through, there was less there in a way to me, simply because it was again a very small margin.
Right.
But it was also just kind of it was so much more explainable.
Right.
He was going up against Hillary Clinton.
Right.
She was incredibly unpopular.
Right.
She was also a woman.
Yes.
This is a real thing in American politics.
Yeah.
It didn't seem, if he'd been running against a really solid Democratic challenger, and he'd managed to eke out a close victory against them, I think I would have been way more shaken by that event.
Right.
But the Brexit thing was remarkable to me.
Right.
And I was in the UK in the lead up, and then I don't know if you remember this, but a pro-Remainer was killed in the previous week or so before Jo. I'm sorry, I've forgotten her name, but
wow.
I believe her name was Jo, and And I saw that happen, and I was just like, how this is getting press, like these Brexit people are clearly insane
Right.
for all sorts of reasons, beyond just blatantly lying about everything.
Right.
Like, look, one's even killed a person.
Right.
Surely the British public will see this, and they'll just go, we don't want to validate these people.
Right.
And oh boy, was I wrong.
Oh man, yeah. So where were you when it happened? When the vote came through?
I believe I was in Canada.
Okay.
I must have been in the UK in just the last couple of weeks before it.
Wow.
Because obviously the UK's press has been front to back Brexit for years now.
Right. Yeah. Totally.
But yeah, I was there and I was talking about it with my grandparents, and I remember trying to be optimistic and trying
right.
And I really couldn't register and wasn't aware of that the UK was this messed up.
Right.
And of course we should tap back. Do you remember? So we've skipped the beginning of it. Do you remember why there's a Brexit vote?
No. Could you?
Of course.
Go back in time and illuminate that, please.
So the only reason this vote ever happened is because of two things, basically. There was the emergence of this of the United Kingdom Racist Party, UKIP, headed by alpha people who I'm not going to bother to bring up.
Right.
You probably know who they are.
Right.
And they started to dig into conservative vote shares.
Right.
Obviously. And hopefully not other vote shares, but certainly in terms of demographics, they were pushing away from conservative vote shares.
Right.
And at the same time, there was a conservative prime minister up for re-election. And he wanted to make sure that he could get re-elected.
Right.
He felt like if he managed to, the margins were quite small, and he felt like if he managed to bring more of these UKIP people back into the fold,
right.
Then everything would be okay.
Right.
So in order to get these racist people back in the party voting for him,
yeah,
he said that he would hold a referendum on the EU, because of course the relationship between racism and your position in the EU is really, really clear.
Yeah.
There are reasons to be against the EU for other stuff, but if you're against open borders because you don't want immigrants coming into your country,
right? Yeah,
you're making it pretty clear
you're racist.
What your position is.
Yeah.
So that was, that was the moment. He was like, if I win, I'll hold a referendum.
Right.
UKIP performed poorly. He won the election.
Right.
He held the referendum. The referendum went. He was a Remainer.
Right. Right. I remember
Cameron, that. It's just a terrible human being.
He's the one remained an idiot for a really long time.
He was the one who made news for when people found out that he fucked a decapitated pig's head in university.
Yeah.
Because that's the sort of thing you do at these prestigious institutions.
Right.
And of course, as we were talking about before, I can't remember if it was Oxford or Cambridge, but I think he went to Cambridge.
Okay.
So that's the sort of, he's just straight out of that funnel we were talking about earlier. It's all coming together.
Yeah.
And that set it all off.
Right.
He, after the vote went through, he decided that he didn't want to deal with this crap that he had set up on the world, and he resigned. And in a stroke of sort of classic, in the moment where I think this was truly the moment where I just sort of lost it with the idea that that the UK was a remotely functioning democracy.
Right.
Because when he resigned, it was up to his party to replace him.
Right.
And it's just your guy has fucked up so much that he resigns.
Yeah.
And it's up to a party election.
Right.
An
in-party election. Wow.
In-party election.
Wow.
To get the next person up.
Yeah.
And that led to Theresa May, who bungled it for years.
Yeah.
And,
And now we have the Goblin himself.
Yeah, and it's this remarkable, and in so many ways, like obviously now we look at Theresa May and go, well, she wasn't that bad, but you can't look at politics without being aware that the way an individual acts and the way that they present themselves produces a swing back.
Yeah.
It's not fair to blame Theresa May for Boris Johnson being in power, but you can't ignore the fact that there's a very clear relationship there.
Right.
It's not fair to blame Obama for Trump being in power.
Right.
But there's a relationship there.
Yes.
The nature of those relationships, I think, is very different.
Right.
But certainly, if you're looking at politics on the grand scale of time, you cannot ignore that stuff. You have to engage with it.
Right.
And so Theresa May's sort of, also a Remainer,
right,
which was again mind blowing. David Cameron decides that he doesn't feel like he's responsible enough to lead us into Brexit because he was a Remainer, and then the Conservatives elect another Remainer. And it's just like, oh my god, this is your functioning democratic system.
Yeah.
Tell me more about it.
Yeah.
It's so crazy. And then of course we end up with Boris Johnson, who, the only thing you can really bring up to his credit is a Brexiteer, and was from the beginning.
Right.
And the whole thing, it drags for years. Like, so now, I've been nattering on. Tell me more about, like, you sort of, what did you remember about where you were when it happened, and what were your sort of reactions to it, and how did it all go for you, buddy?
I remember one of the memes. So it happened, like, really, if I remember, it was pretty close to the U.S. election.
Yes.
Really, very, very, very close. So I remember one of the memes that came out the night of the U.S. election when Donald Trump was elected. Was a meme that, like, the UK is a guy in a bar and he's like, I've just done the most stupid thing in the world. And then the whole US is like, wait, hold my drink. So that's one of the memes I remember. They were dovetailed exactly at a certain point where they happened really close together. So I was in New York at that. No, I was in Syracuse, New York, up until that, because I had been staying there trying to save up money to go to New York when I think Brexit happened. And then I was actually in New York City when the election happened. So it was very...
Yeah, there you go.
Very, yeah. And then I remember, like...
The once home of Donald Trump.
The once home of Donald Trump, exactly.
Now I believe he's a Florida man.
Yeah. Yeah, he likes his... Here, make sure you have that last cookie.
Thank you, buddy.
No problem. But yeah, man, no, it was just wild. And then I think, for me, I didn't really kind of, especially being in New York and being in America, America wasn't talking about Brexit at that point.
No, they were freaking out about other things.
Freaking out about Trump, yeah, exactly. And a lot of crazy stuff was happening with that I don't want to get too into, but there, Trump's executive orders. Steve Bannon was in power at that time, and he's doing a bunch of insane, extreme right stuff and whispering in the president's ear like a Grimir Wormtongue in the Lord of the Rings, He kind of looks like him too. So anyway, that the Brexit stuff kind of, for me, sort of went under the radar until much later on, like years later, when I was thinking about it again.
And you was like, oh my god, it's still going on.
It's still going on, and I was just like, what? And it's still going on right now.
No, the referendum passed, and then there was time until they actually triggered what was called Article 44.
Right.
Which then gave more time in order to try and figure out some sort of exit agreement, and then eventually that culminated at the beginning of this year.
Right.
I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I should know that for sure, but time is starting to blend together a bit.
Yeah.
Coronavirus times, give me a break.
No, exactly. So where do you think it's at now? Like, what's gonna happen with it?
I mean, it's just really, really messed up.
Yeah.
Like they've fired off the agreement. Like now they've left.
Right.
The sort of relationship between the UK and the EU.
Right.
Like now is the time basically that we start seeing the ramifications of the UK leaving this massive free trade partnership.
Right.
And, at a certain point, oh God, we've got so many ideas, but at a certain
Right.
point it would be interesting to talk about globalism.
Right.
But, you can talk about it until you're blue in the face, love it or hate it. It's really the way that international markets work these days.
Right.
You trade internationally. If you have free trade agreements with a bunch of countries, you have the ability to move your stuff way cheaper
Exactly.
Than countries that don't.
And the idea with as well that I really like about the EU is open borders, and the open borders idea is
And that is just that
really amazing.
That is basically that's the selling point for globalism for me.
Yeah.
It's not the trade gets to move freely. I don't care that much about that. What I care about is the fact that people can just travel.
People can travel. Doesn't work like that when the free trade agreement's passed in the United States, unfortunately. But that's a different kind of conversation,
Yeah, no, totally.
But so now one of the things I feel is really heart-rending is I remember reading about all the people now the UK people from the UK who are now all across Europe having to pack up, leave relationships, leave lives behind, uncertain future ahead of them.
So few people still have any, what the status is going to be.
Exactly.
But, each person, previously, everything was just really straightforward.
Right.
And now you've added a level of complexity into just normal human beings' lives.
Right.
The people staying in the UK on foreign passports.
Right.
People staying in the EU on foreign passports.
Right.
The fact that this just overwhelmingly hurts not just the foreigners who are in the UK, but the English and the UKans. There's a better word for that.
Yeah.
The British maybe, who are in the EU.
Right.
That is just so crazy.
Right.
And that this was all done on basically a coin toss referendum, next to 50-50 referendum. Right. I think I've mentioned this before, but there's a line from Randy Newman's song about America.
Right.
That goes, the end of the empires is messy at best, and this empire is ending just like all the rest.
Right.
Like all the rest. And it could not fit more cleanly into the situation that's happening in the UK.
Absolutely.
It's severing its ties with the rest of the world. It's getting rid of one of its last actual avenues to political power.
Right.
On the international stage.
Right.
What does this little country have to offer at a certain point? There are good universities in the rest of Europe now. I hate to break it to the English.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that sort of part of the reason that sort of opening up that we talked about near the end of this generations and generations of classes, and the idea that you now no longer have to go to exactly these top two schools in order to get into higher political positions or to catch top jobs in any major field, really. The fact that that's no longer necessary is partly a result of the interaction between the UK and Europe.
Right.
Between this understanding that there are going to be foreigners coming into our country who are incredibly capable.
Right.
And it would be awfully nice if they could fill some of these spots that we might not be able to fill
right
now. This sort of relationship between, and on a more basic level, just the relationship between a more open, a more free, a more capable culture, more capable in different ways, that sort of has a real effect on the way things work in your country. So now, what do we see going into the future?
That's very true. I apologize. Let me just...
No problem, buddy.
Close that off. We just got this, sorry.
Okay.
No, I'm just joking. I'll put it off. We'll finish up.
Is it all good?
Yeah, it's okay. It's just these people who've called me back a bunch of times. Acorn Canada, I'm not sure what that is. So so I put it on airplane mode.
If that's alright.
Yeah, no, it's totally
we can
fine.
pause if you
No,
want.
we'll continue.
I think we're almost.
We're almost wrapped up.
Right back.
Yeah.
Anyhoodle. So we were just at the end of.
Yeah, so I guess we had. This is really like the sort of last fall from grace from England we were kind of talking about,
I was, yes, exactly. So I was trying to look into the future, and I was saying, it's hard not to see how now that they've really messed this one thing up,
right,
and become even more insular than they were before,
right,
which is a remarkable feat. It's hard not to see how this doesn't sort of lead into just further and further regression,
right.
And all of a sudden, maybe people go back to this time when, Edinburgh, no! When Cambridge and Oxford were the only schools.
Right.
Maybe that starts to happen again.
Right.
Maybe because there has to be a backlash.
Yeah.
There's going to be a backlash to Brexit.
Right.
And then there has to be a backlash to that.
Yeah.
It's the whenever there's a revolution, there's always counter-revolutionaries.
Right.
Whenever there's a swing one way, there's always a swing back.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And sorry.
I think it's really interesting. I guess if we wrap this up, I wanted to ask you one really interesting question. Do you ever see the UK being able to return to the EU if they sort their stuff out and are like, we're sorry, we want to come back now. Like, this isn't working for us? Or do you think it's a done deal? Like, they're done, they're out?
It's really hard because on a basic level, I feel like because if you look at it in terms of international relations,
right,
the UK decides to leave. Leaves, things go terribly for it. It changes its mind, comes back. That looks great for the EU.
Right.
On the other hand, why the frick would the EU let them back in?
Yeah. No. Exactly.
What? Just so they can bail again in another 10 years?
No. Exactly.
They get some of their rewards back. They change their minds. They leave.
Yeah.
I think it's there's been pushes for ages about having another referendum, calling another referendum, and in general, I think the idea of having a referendum on a topic like this is just insane.
Yeah.
There are points where I think referendums can be useful, and that should be on questions that you guarantee that everybody who's voting in the referendum, roughly speaking, or at least a vast majority of the people, actually understand
what's going on.
Christ, I could barely understand the Brexit stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty tapped into the politics.
No, absolutely.
So that I find it hard to definitely I don't think it would happen in the near future.
Yeah.
The right move for the EU, even if the UK changed its mind tomorrow.
Right.
I think the right move for the EU would certainly be to just let them stew for a while, regardless. Yeah. Give them 5 to 10 years of messing it up, see how they go.
Excuse me, sorry about that.
Yeah.
Oh,
no
man.
problem.
Yeah.
And I think, there's a lot of ideas, of course, in UK about, how they're gonna make this all work and find the silver lining.
Right.
But it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
These guys were your largest trading partner. They were across a small gap of water from you.
Yeah.
You're not gonna fix that by trading with China, who doesn't really hates the UK for all sorts of legitimate reasons.
Yeah. No. Absolutely.
And frankly, the UK at this point can hate China for all sorts of pretty legitimate reasons. Are you going to try and do that with America? Are you going to just do all your trade across the Atlantic Ocean? Are you going to trade with Canada? We're half the size of the UK.
Yeah. No, exactly.
The answer is no. They're going to trade with the EU on worse terms.
Yeah.
And that's just going to be worse.
Yeah.
So I think my fear ultimately, because I like to pay attention to economics,
Right.
and I like to be aware of that stuff, and I think it's valuable information due to the way the world is now.
Right.
My real fear is how it reflects on sort of the internal political situation in the UK, on how it deepens divisions that already exist in that
Right.
in that society, in that culture. I find that obviously that's even harder to understand and predict.
Yeah.
But you know, because the thing that's scary about it is because so much of this has been about this bizarre sense of nationalism
Right.
and monarchism and
Right.
all this other messed up crap. Because that's all like bundled into it.
Right.
Your hope would be, like I was talking about things that swing back and
Yeah.
forth, your hope would be that the swing would be towards people being more rational and thinking more clearly about the world.
Yeah.
But it's hard to see what those people think about and do.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. I guess we should probably wrap it up. But if you kind of answered like sort of a bit about the future question that we usually ask, but I guess, is there anything sort of that you look forward to in the future, or are just interested to see what you're related, how you relate to England? Yeah.
A little cynically speaking, it would be awfully nice, just throwing this out there,
Yeah.
it would be awfully nice as a Canadian who's making Canadian dime, if the pound were to plummet,
Yeah.
then it would be a lot easier for me to return to the UK.
Definitely.
That would be bittersweet, of course, because it would damage the wealth of my family and all the people over there I care about would
Right.
be in a worse off spot.
Right.
But it would be nice to see them.
Yeah. Live near them, exactly.
That is one of the few sort of silver linings I can see.
Right.
And I think the best thing that can be said on a more political level is that whenever there is crazy turmoil like this,
Right.
there is always a lot of opportunity for people to interact with the discourse and to present more cohesive new ideas of thought.
Mm-hmm.
People
To learn, just to learn, just to get more informed. That definitely people want to figure out what the hell is going on.
People more open.
Yeah.
I think it's probably safe to say that people in the UK have thought more about the EU in the last 2 or 3 years than in the entire rest of their engagement with the EU combined.
Absolutely.
So, and I don't think it's going to happen, but it wouldn't. It would be weird, and I think there would be a lot of damaging repercussions for it. But it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, maybe, if the UK managed to do okay outside of the EU. But that's not what anybody really thinks is going to happen.
Nice.
So,
yeah.
What about you, buddy? What are your predictions for the future?
Oh man, with regards to England, I'd love to be able to visit.
That's a good one.
Yeah,
I would love to be able to show you around.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's kind of what I just learn more about the history, learn more about the Celtic history, but really just to go there, as an adult and kind of go around and hey, if it happens to be cheaper, I will take advantage of that. I hope, but I also hope
it could be a tourism base.
Yeah, and maybe maybe that's what they got to do is just. And I don't know. It'd be really cool if they somehow figure out ways to strengthen ties with their former colonies.
Yeah.
Be like, hey, can you all help us out now?
Oh, man.
Hey, let's do decolonialism 101, and the Commonwealth countries have to step in and be like, all right, we'll come help you out. Who knows?
I think the last place I want to go, I think I probably want to end on something a bit more positive.
Yeah.
There are so many messed up things about the UK, about the political system, about the classism, about its international relations, about people in the UK, their idea about the position of the country in the world. This imperialist dream, it lives on in the UK.
Oh, I'm sure.
All the racism, all the crap. That stuff can overpower you. And there's a couple basic things that I think are true about the place that I don't think I've mentioned this whole time. So I'm going to try and get them in the end.
Yeah.
First of all, it has to be one of the most beautiful places in the world.
Right.
It's just, in terms of just the physical nature of the place, it's incredibly dense. It's steeped in history.
Right.
There have been wars there, but overall it's really been very stable for a long time.
Right.
And it's just beautiful. It's got this remarkable climate. You feel when you're there like you are a part of something older.
Right.
There's that real sense of history.
Right.
Or there been something over every hill.
Right.
And when you stretch out those thousands of years of history and you put on this little blip,
right,
that makes things feel a lot better.
Right.
There is hope there that, however ludicrous this all is, that things that are important to those people can remain.
Yeah, totally.
That sure, the political stuff may not be reparable, but the country has a lot going for it.
Right.
The people in general can be pretty crazy, but again, a huge variety.
Right.
A crazy variety of just different and sort of just sort of interesting and diverse communities and human beings all across the country.
Right.
And that is something that makes, even though so many things are messed up there, when I visit, that's still something I have.
That's what you look for, right? Yeah, that's a nice part about.
And it's something that I hope keeps my whole family from not just emigrating.
Coming to visit you, because they could go the other way. They could come here, knock on 206 Langley, and be like, "Hey, Gabe,
Canadian?
Are we all here now?" Oh man,
because you do go back there, and it's just like, man, like it's just the scale.
Yeah.
Canada's a huge place.
Yeah.
England's a small one. And that means, you can walk for hundreds of miles in Canada and see the same thing, basically. If you walk for hundreds of miles in England, you've crossed the whole country.
Right, no, exactly.
And you've seen everything.
Yeah.
And yet there's still always more.
There's still always more, yeah.
So that would be the positive note to leave it on. Thank you so much for doing
thanks,
this,
man.
buddy.
Let's do fist pound, just because I sneezed. And that was good. Yeah, thanks, everybody.
And then we'll wrap it. Another long one, but
that's okay.
Oh. This is always more, yeah. So that would be the positive note to leave it on. Thank you so much for doing this,
man.
buddy.
Let's do fist pound.
We're playing the back on the video. That's funny. I didn't even realize I'd stopped it, so maybe we'll cut this